here you are, going back on another trek with us down the road. We've got a lot to cover today, not the least of which, of course, is the tragedy that happened in Buffalo over the weekend. We're going to visit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about the gubernatorial race in Minnesota. Went to 9 ballots. That's right, 9 ballots. Can you imagine that? Also, we're going to get a chance to visit with our guest here. He's a senior partner at Headstorm and a supply chain expert. Let's bring in Rob Kelley. Rob, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
We're talking about supply chain. It's one of the things that obviously we here in the upper Midwest are concerned about, and being able to fulfill the commitment to the world. You know, raising wheat, raising soybeans, those type of issues, and then talking about the shortage when it comes to fuels and the renewable fuel standard. All of that needs to be discussed. So President Biden outlined a plan to boost ag production. Give us your take on that, Rob.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to hear President Biden speak to the issue, which is a big issue right now. If you think in terms of geopolitical events, we know that Ukraine is in a war right now, and they're a big exporter of grain to Europe and Africa. Belarus, who's actually kind of, I guess, sided with Russia, and now we've blocked them. They're a big producer of grain, and then Russia themselves are too. So those impact the global markets, which impact prices and availability and whatnot. And so I'm glad to hear President Biden speak about those issues. I am a little concerned. He raised the idea of double cropping, and I'm sure your listeners are familiar with that term. That has limited advantages, right? Because you can only ask so much of the soil generally. And so doubling up sometimes works, but the term double is probably not quite accurate. So a little concerned about really what the full term effects of that are going to be, but at least there's some awareness.
Was there any conversation in the circles that you live in on production on land that normally isn't as productive? I get that, but that the government controls, whether it be through CRP or other methods, that maybe you could access this land and put some small grains on.
Yeah, frankly, so I'm in Dallas, Texas. So when I talk to farmers in Oklahoma, Texas, and the surrounding areas, there's not as much irrigation farming down here as maybe what you have up there. And so what they typically encounter down here are situations where when you double up, the yields drop significantly, maybe not as much as half, but in that 60 to 75% range. So hence the term double cropping is a little bit of a misnomer. And while it makes sense for the government to include insurance policies so that farmers could claim that and try to get them to, promote them to go for double cropping, you're doubling the work, you're doubling the investment, and you're doubling the time that these farmers are having to do that. And to get, a 25% hit on their production to do that it's kind of a tall ask for the farmers. So down here in this part of the country, they're not quite as pumped about it as maybe other parts of the country.
Well, and the timing of it all, we're still yet to put in a lot of the crop, just basically because of wet conditions. But normally by this time of year, people are looking at the end of spring planting. Obviously, where you're at, that's long since been done. And so if you're going to raise specific grain that you're short of, wheat, for example, knowing what's going on in Ukraine, shouldn't that have been done prior to planting?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it even take it a step further, really everything west of here. So all the states in the mountain and Pacific time zones are going through drought problems right now. And that's really where double cropping kind of stems from, is to kind of replenish that soil, right? And it's typically done through water. And with drought conditions, it becomes The timing couldn't have been worse, frankly, to your point.
Yeah, and that, Secretary Vilsack was Secretary of Agriculture before. And so this isn't his first gig. He had 8 years of doing that, and it surprised me that there wasn't a better understanding of what farmers go through in the spring. I've been asking a lot of farmers with the shortage of wheat that's headed our way, and it is headed our way. I've been asking them, with wheat prices being what they are, if they're not going to raise more wheat, because there is an incentive to raise more wheat and barley. For the first time in a long time, it's worth some money. And yet what I'm hearing from them is not that they're not going to raise more wheat and barley, that what they have is what they have. They're going to stick with corn and soybeans. And so I'm curious what the southern end of the Great Plains states believes.
Yeah, I think and you know what, it's similar to the energy industry. It's very, very difficult to react, right? Kind of tactically react to policy decisions or certainly geopolitical current events. And so what I'm hearing from farmers here is they're staying the course. They're going to stick with the production numbers that they have. If they do double cropping, it'll be soybean. It'll be kind of more secondary crops, if that makes sense. So I don't see a lot of change, which means that it becomes more of a longer term issue, right? We're going to have the production increase, and that's going to be, through next season, maybe even into next year.
Well, let's talk about oil in just a little bit, because that certainly is right there on the front burner as well. But where do you see this heading in terms of the world? In terms of what the world looks like, because we always look at it from a U.S. standpoint. What do we export? What do we raise here on a normal year, bushel-wise, those type of issues. But we never look at it from, hey, who are the buyers around the world that need the product that Ukraine turned out, that the U.S. turns out? And when you look at them and you look at supply chain, who do you see paying the ultimate price for this?
Oh, yeah. Well, it always trickles down to the consumers, right? In the energy industry, it's very interesting. Some of the energy companies kind of have a bad taste in their mouth right now, because if you think about everything that transpired up until about a year ago, you heard about sustainability efforts and going green, and we need less oil, not more. And now suddenly the tables are turned, and now the government's like, hey, we need more oil production. And they're sitting there going, wait a minute, you just told us that you were going to go solar and go wind power, and you were trying to go away from us. And so I don't think they're too energized about boosting production. And even if they wanted to from a market position, they have the same labor shortages that other sectors in the U.S. economy are going through right now. COVID turned a lot of people away from energy, retail, restaurant, to go into career fields in other industries. And so now they've got to try to pull some of those oil workers back to get production increases going. So I think you're going to see some challenges to consumers in energy, in ag as well, because of these shortages in the supply chain, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense to me. The renewable fuel standard, the fact that some of these crops, we talk about oil and people consider oil this industry and they consider ag this industry, and they don't realize where they overlap. And the president spoke to that issue about renewable fuels and how they could help the shortage when it came to product at the gas pump. And yet what my concern about all of that was much of the product that they're talking about is going to be needed on the grocery store shelf. And so I'm curious from you as an expert, what if we're utilizing these crops we raise the right way by pushing so hard to make sure we're using them in our vehicles? Yeah.
Great question. And I don't know if I have a good answer for that, because honestly, these are things that have been years, if not decades in the making, right? And so now you've got these policy decisions that are trickling down into our current events. I think, honestly, if I were to have a crystal ball, my projections are that we're going to have an energy issue, an energy challenge through the end of this year and probably through Q1 next year. I just don't see any way around it because of this kind of perfect storm of the energy costs, supply chain, labor shortages. All of those things together are making things tough. And so we see it directly at the pump, right? We all see it at the gas pump, but we also see it through the supply chain, which affects the products that we're seeing in our stores as well. So the consumers are going to get hit really on two different fronts.
Well, okay, so let's use those as examples. $4 gas, which I know in many parts of the country they say we could take $4 gas. A shortage when it comes to small grain products, wheat, barley, those type of things. And actually, I think you're going to be able to make that same argument on corn, knowing that a lot of it's going to be used in the form of ethanol. You know, so you've got a couple of shortages there, but you know, we started this conversation by, are we looking far enough ahead? And what you just described, if it goes to the first quarter of next year, there's a lot of people on very fixed income, certainly here in the Midwest, that rely on fuel oil for home heating. And so, you know, they're paying for it at the pump, they're paying for it at the grocery store, and now they're going to pay for it just to keep warm this fall. And so what does that do to the economy?
I think you continue to see price adjustments going up. I think we'll see if the Fed affects prices with the raising of the prime interest rates. We saw 0.5%. They've basically committed to another 0.5%, and there may be another one after that too. So as we head into fall, we'll start to get a better sense of home heating oil prices and where those stand. But I got to tell you, it doesn't look good right now. I think through the end of this year, we're going to see prices maybe not increasing anymore, but certainly staying at the higher levels for the time being.
I do want to talk to you, though, about the oil industry in terms of the benefits that come with this. You know, if you're in Texas, I know you're very familiar with Oklahoma and Texas and what the oil industry does there. Here in North Dakota, for a long time, we've been the #2 state in the union in terms of producing oil. A lot of those, you know, oil wells got capped. They still could produce. They didn't use them because oil was worth $30 a barrel, and they said, you know what, we can't make money doing it. Well, now you're seeing those same oil companies not necessarily rush out to start pumping oil, but enjoying $100+ per barrel of oil. And so they're making record profits. And so in some of these cases, is it in fact a shortage, or is it in fact hey, I can make a lot of money here, I can bushel?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think there is a shortage because, you know, we lost Russia's oil, which was about 10% of what the American capacity used. So I think we have a shortage, but I think you are exactly right. I don't think oil companies are rushing out there to save the day like maybe they did, you know, in past challenges or even pre-recession times, you know, that we had in the last decade or 2 decades. So I think they're going to, I think they will, whatever the labor shortage will allow them to do, I think they will do because they do have some equipment. They might uncap some wells, but I think it's going to be a much smaller percentage than what the government would like them to do. And I think it's because, you know, let's say we turn this around in a year or so. I think the sustainability, drumbeat is going to get louder and louder again. And you just have this constant challenge back and forth between those two camps. So I think you're going to see more of the same, frankly, from the oil companies in the short term. Yeah,
I think in some degrees they're shooting themselves in the foot because people are going to have a bigger drive to get away from the use of crude oil. But that's a conversation for another day, as well as the issue that you brought up, which is labor shortage, which is real. It's very real. Rob, good to have you coming down the road with us. Rob Kelley is a senior partner at Headstorm. I thank you for your time, sir.